my work specifically rests on the horse's mouth. A conspiracy is defined, if you open any dictionary, sociological dictionary, like the Collins Dictionary of Sociology, and look under the word conspiracy, it will say that a conspiracy is only reprehensible or questionable when it is advocated overzealously and when it is based on very thin evidence. Well, in this series, and in the programs that deal specifically with conspiracy, I am presenting the facts in a very eloquent way and backing it up with tons of evidence. And specifically, my whole approach to this rests on going to the horse's mouth. Because anyone can say anything about any subject. But when you go to the horse's mouth, to the letters and documents and memoirs and writings of the original members of these individuals, who are very elite, they hold very elite positions in society, we're suddenly on very strong ground from a research point of view. Now, Giuseppe Mazzini, the head of the Illuminati, himself says something absolutely of monumental importance. He says, "We form an association of brothers in all points of the globe, yet there is one unseen that can hardly be felt, yet it weighs on us. Whence comes it? Where is it? No one knows, or at least no one tells. This association is secret, even to us, the veterans of the secret societies." In the movie 3 Days of the Condor, when the Robert Redford character is finding out what is going on behind the government, he's actually instructed by the CIA personnel that there's really a CIA within the CIA. We have the Masonic order basing itself on the cell structure, the pyramidical idea of decompartmentalization, but that's based on the old Freemasonic, the old Illuminati pyramid. And governments and corporations are also based on that kind of idea, that nobody in one cell has the faintest idea what's going on around him or above him or below. Now, the Duke of Brunswick, who was the world Grand Master of Freemasonry in the 17th century, understanding, like George Washington, like many of the founding fathers, and like other people who were in the Freemasons, that Madame Blavatsky is saying that the high Masons, the people who were trying to do good in that secret society, understood that it was being infiltrated by these foreign elements, and that the personages like Duke d'Orléans and Adam Weishaupt and Giuseppe Mazzini and Albert Pike were insinuating into Freemasonry something that was much pernicious and very foreign to what the original tenets of Freemasonry were. Well, the Grand Master of World Freemasonry stood up in the 17th century and actually asked for the worldwide disbandment of Freemasonry because he was so worried about that it had been overtaken. And in his own words he says, "I have been convinced that we as an order have come under the power of some very evil occult order, profoundly versed in science, both occult and otherwise, though not infallible, their methods being black magic, that is to say, electromagnetic power, hypnotism, and powerful suggestion. We are convinced that the order is being controlled by some sun order, after the nature of the Illuminati, if not by that order itself." Now, the Illuminati unfortunately succeeded in uniting with Freemasonry at the Council of Wilhelmsbad in 1780. John Robinson, who was a teacher or professor, was actually approached by the Illuminati and asked to join. But he suspected that something was up, and after researching it and not joining, he wrote one of the first books exposing them. And this book dates from 1798. It's called Proofs of a Conspiracy. And in it he says that the Illuminati consider themselves strong because of their concealment. The great strength of our order, say the leaders of the Illuminati, lies in its concealment. Let it never appear in any place in its own name, but always covered by another name and another occupation. None is fitter than the 3 lower degrees of Freemasonry. The public is accustomed to it, expects little from it, and therefore takes little notice of it. General J.F.C. Fuller, the war historian, writes, "The government of the Western nations, whether monarchical or republican, has passed into the invisible hands of a plutocracy, international in power and grasp. It was, I venture to suggest, this semi-occult power which pushed the mass of the American people into the cauldron of World War I." And George Washington himself, in the writings of George Washington, volume 36, we read him say in a letter, "I have heard much of the nefarious and dangerous plan of the Illuminati. It was not my intention to doubt that the doctrines of the Illuminati and the principles of Jacobinism had not spread in the United States. On the contrary, no one is more truly satisfied of this fact than I am. Now, the Bavarian Illuminati was divided into degrees, different 8 or 9 levels. And Adam Weishaupt says, "These good folk swell our numbers and fill our money box. Set yourselves to work. These gentlemen must be made to nibble at the bait. But this sort of people must always be made to believe that the grade they have reached is the last." So it's the perfect way of controlling people. You initiate them, and nobody knows what's above them until you get there. And then by then it's too late. And always at the stage that you're at, you think you've attained the total knowledge. It's a very attractive concept. Very empowering and very hard to break. Alois Hoffmann, editor of the Journal de Vienna, says, "I shall never cease to repeat that the French Revolution has come from Masonry, and that it was made by writers and the Illuminati." And Joseph Willard, the president of Harvard University, waited till his retirement to speak his mind. He said, "There is sufficient evidence that a number of societies of the Illuminati have been established in this land. They are doubtless striving to secretly undermine all our ancient institutions, civil and sacred. We live in an alarming period. The enemies of all order are seeking our ruin. Should infidelity generally prevail, our independence would fall, of course. Our republican government would be annihilated." Now, there are many books on this subject, especially the works of John Coleman, who's another insider, who's got an incredible tale to tell. We have Fritz Springmeyer's The Bloodline of the Illuminati, that again goes into the modern families who are related to them. And we have Carroll Quigley, a very powerful resource, the guru of Bill Clinton. In his book, Tragedy and Hope, he says there does exist, and has existed for a generation, an international Anglophile network which operates to some extent in the way the radical right believes the communists act. In fact, this network, we may identify as the round table groups, has no aversion to cooperating with the communists or any other groups, and frequently does so. I know of the operations of this network because I have studied it for 20 years and was permitted for 2 years in the early 1960s to examine its papers and secret records. I have no aversion to it or to most of its aims, and have for much of my life been close to it and to many of its instruments. Now, this book, Tragedy and Hope, is in any library. It can be ordered on the internet, and people can read what Carroll Quigley is talking about for themselves. Another great scholar, member of the Library of Congress and a major historian, James Billington, in his book Fire in the Minds of Men, The Origins of the Revolutionary Faith, he says the plain fact is that by the mid-1810s, there were not just 1 or 2, but scores of secret or secret revolutionary organizations throughout Europe, extending even into Latin America and the Middle East. It was they who, in the process of modernization, pioneered a phenomena by now familiar: impatient youth forming their own organizations to combat monarchical religious authority. The story of the secret societies can never be fully reconstructed, but it has been badly neglected, even avoided, one suspects, because the evidence that is available repeatedly leads one into territory equally uncongenial to modern historians in the West and the East. President Woodrow Wilson, in his book The New Freedom, says some of the biggest men in the United States in the field of commerce and manufacture are afraid of somebody, are afraid of something. They know there is a power somewhere, so organized, so subtle, so watchful, so interlocked, so complete, so pervasive, that they'd better not speak above their breath when they speak in condemnation of it. And Benjamin Disraeli, again, in his writings, says that the government of this country has not only to deal with governments, kings and ministers, but also with secret societies, elements which must be taken into account, which at the last moment can bring our plans to nothing, which have agents everywhere, who incite assassinations and can, if necessary, lead a massacre. On April 27, 1961, John F. Kennedy said, "The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings." And 10 days prior to his assassination, he said, "The high office of president has been used to foment a plot to destroy the Americans' freedom, and before I leave office, I must inform the citizen of his plight. So where does this all lead? Where does the knowledge that we have that there's occult secret societies operating in the world, how does that impact the prophecies of the Maya and the whole future of mankind leading up to the professed 0 hour and end date of 2012? In Atlantis, Alien Visitation and Genetic Manipulation, my book, at the end I have 4 outcomes. We understand that the alien masters, their progeny, their offspring, have been pretty successful in rebuilding all of their technology. I mean, we are, after all, living not only in the industrial age, but the silicon age. We understand that there's a Stargate, and perhaps even the movies are giving us updates on how successful they are about breaking through. And what would happen if they do break through? Well, I find that there's a great interest in secret society enclaves of the number 4. A lot of the symbols and emblems that they have, no, not less, the pyramid itself, is made up of 4 faces all coming to a point, 4 different agendas, all operating separately and financed separately, but all serving the top. And taking that motif, in my book I have 4 outcomes. Now, of course, outcomes there could be many, there could be innumerable. But again, the number 4 is very important. So in my mind, in my thinking, I thought it best to think of the 4 possible scenarios that seem to be the possible scenarios that are going to unfold themselves in the next period, in the next 10 years or so. And these are the burn and rise no more, which is number 1. Number 2 is, I term, bridges to Babylon outcome. Number 3 is start the fuse tector. And number 4 is the empire strikes back. More specifically, number 1 is that the progeny of Atlantis succeed in regaining all their technological hardware, especially that for breaking through the Stargate, and they prepare for departure. But in so doing, they come out into the open more than ever, startling the human race who cannot comprehend what is happening. When they're out of range, they destroy our planet and all that lives on it. Does that sound far-fetched? Well, think about it. These are cosmic criminals. They arrived on our planet, but they didn't want to come. They didn't come here by their free choice, and they haven't enjoyed it since they've been here. Their progeny have the alien DNA strongly inside of them, and they despise nature, they despise the planet, they despise the humans, and they despise the good. And criminals don't necessarily, as a matter of course, like to leave evidence or a trace behind them. So couple that with the hatred that they have for our planet, and that scenario isn't very pleasant. Outcome number 2, the masters realize that no matter what they do, they cannot vacate the earth, and that they are forever to be chained to the pit. In this case, they start ruling the world with unmitigated tyranny, relentlessly and openly. The human race loses whatever privileges, quote-unquote, it enjoyed while its utility was beneficial. Now it is deprived and slaughtered. Debauchery is everywhere, and people even turn upon themselves, sinking into chaos of unimaginable proportions, with all the dark, repressed content of consciousness in full view, without the restraint of inner or outer authority. Number 3. The good, under the weight of the yoke, finally rise up against their oppressors, actively preventing them from ever leaving and taking their evil elsewhere. To do this we destroy, that is, sacrifice ourselves, taking them with us. That's the old fight fire with fire scenario. It might sound ludicrous, it might sound heroic to somebody like Sam Peckinpah, but of course we know it would leave the earth as a revolving headstone in space. However, in the ancient past there was a scenario that very much approximated this. In Celtic legend they talk about that the king of the Gaels was pretty much ready to sacrifice himself in order to totally annihilate this evil archy that had risen amongst them, their enemy, their nemesis. On the field of battle he was willing to do that. And number 4, mankind finally discovers the correct means to the end and vanquishes its enemy with no excessive loss of life or home world. We eradicate the enemy and finally resolve the problem of evil. The beasts are slain, the damsels are rescued, and the ending is happy. Now, up until now, even with the vast majority of their sophisticated technical hardware again in their possession, the progeny of the Atlanteans are not able to break out of quarantine, out of their internment on the silent planet. The moon is not an ordinary satellite, and no man has physically landed on the moon, though probes have. The commission to build this craft to go beyond the moon has been now privatized, Paul Allen, for instance, announced his prototype craft on May 15th, 2004. However, that date, May 15th, just happens to be one of the most important days for the Illuminati. It's called the Mercuralia. So at midnight on the Mercuralia, postulate the wisdom of a departed serpent. So when one of the Lemurians or one of the Atlanteans would fall, their lifespan would finally end. They did not just bury them like we bury our dead. How could you encapsulate the remarkable life of such a being? Evil as they were, and of course the Lemurians were not evil, but then how would you encapsulate such a miraculous and incredible life? They chose to do it in stone. They chose to do it through the mausoleums. So when we look at these ancient sites and these megalithic sites, they're not necessarily graves. Some of them are. But most of them are actually commemorations, cenotaphs, mausoleums in stone. And the harmonic proportions and the places that they're put are part of that commemoration. They're like a symphony, a eulogy in stone. We also find that government buildings and churches and banks and other key monuments are often placed on these axiational lines and dragon paths. We also find that the houses of major royal family figures and potentates and politicians are also placed either on or near such lines so that they can enhance the energy and work with that energy. This is a very important subject that is still to fully come to light. We understand, for instance, that the word Capitol derives from Caput Draconis, the head and tail of the dragon. So the leaders, the state heads, the serpent masters literally sit at where the tail and the head of the dragon meet, what we call the Capitol buildings, based on occult geometry, occult archaeoastronomy. The Vatican City, with obelisks and the monuments in the center, designed like a zodiac, and then you have the tower or the clock tower in the middle to bring terrestrial time, link it to sidereal time. The controllers, the masters. We have cities designed like zodiacs, not only ritual cities, but important power grid energy vortexes. And several books like the ones we looked at earlier, The Secret Architecture of Our Nation's Capital and Graham Hancock's Talisman, go into this. And the precision and the methodology used to create the shapes and to create the orientations to the horizon of these incredible buildings. The layout of the cities, Paris, London, Washington, D.C., Philadelphia. The names of the streets are very important. David Oveson says about the pentagram specifically, when found in a text, the star determined or indicated to the reader that the group of hieroglyphics associated with it was related to spiritual matters. It was related to the heavens, to invisible energies, which the Greeks called etheric. Wow, that's a heavy piece of information. Now what are we to think when we look at the shape of the US Pentagon or the symbol for Lockheed? What are we to think even when we look on the flag of the United States of America or half the flags of the world and see that star? Are we to take this man's word seriously? That when you put a star on something, even if it's a product you buy in a store, somebody is telling you that this has another octave to it, another dimension, where this is a little apostrophe, a little sign that says this is spiritual, this is dedicated to some etheric power. As we saw earlier, the Egyptian hieroglyphic is literally etched in stone in the great city, Washington, D.C. That the whole city is dedicated to the star Sirius. We find that the top political buildings, the centers of education and religion, are literally orientated to the horizon and to the constellations and to planetary alignments. We have oval offices and obelisks from Egypt. And we have the monuments like the Eiffel Tower and other, every city has these standing stones, these monuments, because again, the earth can be thought of like a body. Acupuncture, acupressure. The acupuncturist will put a needle into your body to either stimulate energy, to release energy, or to suppress energy. Well, the great geomanticists of the world understood that there's a feng shui of the earth as well. What happens if you want to suppress some good energy that's flowing? Put an obelisk there, put a statue, put a hideous piece of modern art. That'll do the trick, all right. And what happens if you're a decent individual and you're aware of spiritual earth energy and you want to conduct powerful vortexes of energy? Same thing, you can put a statue or an obelisk or a round circle or a stone circle there to help to transmute and transmit that energy. There's something going on in our cities. There's something going on in our world. We'll go to certain sacred sites or go on vacation and we'll feel lovely, we'll feel totally inspired and feel a great feeling of peace and remembrance. And then we'll go to other places and feel absolutely horrible for some reason. We can't put our finger on why that is. David Oveson goes on to say, the ancient records indicate that it was a practice in former ages for the mystery centers that directed civilization to hand out newly founded cities to the care of specific spiritual beings. So not only are they earthbound entities that are maybe buried or commemorated by the cities and the great monuments, but now we're having them dedicated to astral beings, to the cosmocrates, to the macrobes. Now David Oveson goes on to say, perhaps it is sufficient that we recognize as true the medieval arcane notion that such beings could be invited to participate in the life of a city by means of the spiritual art of astrology. These spiritual beings he's referring to are known in Latin as the cosmocrates or the angeli motivori, the angelic beings. He says the leader of these mighty beings was due to take over the direction of Western civilization in 1881. This caused considerable excitement in the esoteric circles of Washington, D.C. and the occult world in general. So now we hear that there's a hierarchy of these beings, there's a leader of these beings, and theosophists know what this means. It reminds us of Steiner and his work on the concept of Michael and Ahriman. Again, he spoke about different centuries, different ages being presided over. But here we're hearing that these beings, are they the macrobes? Are these John Dee's macrobes that are overlooking the destiny of mankind, overlooking our social welfare, being conjured into existence by the elites that are just hiding behind the veil of politics, operating in our world by way of the fronts of religion in exactly the same way a criminal syndicate like the mafia operates behind retail fronts and casinos? I mean, is this what we're talking about here? When it comes specifically to the internment of age-old beings, the Revelation 17 says something that needs to be noted. The beast that thou sawest was and is not, yet shall ascend out of the bottomless pit and go into perdition. And they that dwell on the earth shall marvel, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was, is not, yet will be again. So again here, despite the flowery language, despite the posy, despite the cryptic nature of biblical passages, you know, we can work it out. Here we're being told that there was a being, entities that were, then they were not, and then they shall be again. And we have the motif of the bottomless pit. One has to decode this, one has to understand the metaphors. Now, we think when we hear about bottomless pits, we have this normal idea of internment in the earth, under the ground. But could it not be, as some researchers are saying, that the earth itself in this quarantine situation is the bottomless pit, and that these entities have been chained to the pit? The book of Baruch again, there were the giants famous from the beginning, that were of so great stature and so expert in war. Book of Enoch, this child which is born to you shall survive on earth, and his sons shall be saved with him. When all mankind who are on the earth die, he shall be safe, and his posterity shall beget the giants, not spiritual, but carnal. In Revelation 9, the rest of mankind that were not killed by these plagues still did not repent of the work of their hands. They did not stop worshipping demons and idols of gold, silver, bronze, stone, and wood idols that cannot see or hear or walk. Nor did they repent of their murders, their magic arts, their sexual immorality, or their thefts. So we're hearing about the gods but gods and giants in connection with immorality and amorality. I mean, even from a Christian point of view, these passages need clarification. And that's why a lot of Christian thinkers are even trying to extrapolate and find deeper meanings in these enigmatic passages. Because what are we hearing about? Almost in every passage, when we hear about the gods or God, we're also hearing about crime, debauchery, perversity, immorality. Now, why would these two subjects suddenly go together when we're talking religion? Again, on the concept of the underworld, another term used often is the abyss. When he opened the abyss, smoke rose from it like the smoke from a gigantic furnace. The sun and the sky were darkened by the smoke from the abyss, and out of the smoke locusts came down upon the earth, and were given power like that of the scorpions of the earth. They were told not to harm the grass of the earth or any plant or tree, but only those people who did not have the seal of God on their foreheads. They were not given power to kill them, but only to torture them for 5 months. And the agony they suffered was like that of the sting of a scorpion when it strikes a man. During those days, men will seek death, but will not find it. They will long to die, but death will elude them. The locusts looked like horses prepared for battle. On their heads they wore something like crowns of gold. Their faces resembled human faces. Their hair was like women's hair, and their teeth were like the lion's teeth. They had breastplates like breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings was like the thundering of many horses and chariots rushing into battle. They had tails and stings of scorpions, and their tails, they had the power to torment people for 5 months. And they had as a king over them the angel of the abyss, whose name is Abaddon, and in Greek Apollyon. So again, the motif coming out of the scriptures of an army of darkness arising out of the depths, coming forth into the world of man, arising out of the pit, wearing armor, causing chaos, torturing the human race. In Daniel 7, the great beasts which are four kinds which shall arise out of the earth. This, he said, the fourth beast shall be born, the fourth kingdom upon earth, which shall be diverse, that's different from all other kingdoms. So here we have the beast rising out of the earth, creating yet another kingdom of control and debauchery. And we have that age-old prohibition that man was never meant to make a picture, or take a photograph, or take a Polaroid, or speak about, or draw, or ever depict those entities that are in the earth or under the water. This edict again comes before thou shalt not kill. You'd think, why on earth would such a prohibition exist? And there are names for the underworld: Tartarus, Sheol, Hades, hell. And the graves were opened, says Matthew 27, and many bodies of the saints which slept arose, and came out of the graves after his resurrection, and went into the holy city, and appeared unto many. Now this giant lineage is traceable after the flood by the same Hebrew word used for giant, like the sons of Anak. Certain tribes had this intermixing. These were the only ones of the Old Testament which God said to destroy completely. This was the same lineage Goliath came from. The word giant has another meaning, as a tyrant or bully, and can mean much more than physical stature. The Victorian writer, Bulwer Lytton, we find that he wrote about these in his books. In 1867, Wentworth Little founded the English Rosicrucian Society. That's a secret society that goes back to antiquity, but it was revamped and reformed in the 1800s. And the founder, Wentworth Little, he was in contact with the German Rosicrucians. Little recruited his followers, up to 144 people, from the ranks of the high-ranking Freemasons. One of his disciples was Edward Bulwer Lytton, who was a learned man celebrated throughout the world for his novel, The Last Days of Pompeii. And of course, The Last Days of Pompeii as a novel has been taken as a universal metaphor for the decline and fall of civilizations. Now, he also wrote The Coming Race, which featured a mystical pre-Nazi group in Germany. This Berlin group called itself the Luminous Lodge, or Vril Society, and had enormous energy potential, the Vril. But the Vril Society lived in caves and would emerge to reign over the surface of the earth. So here we have in fiction, and as in many cases we have, fiction that's individuals in power, individuals with secret society connections, putting out fiction that's telling us a story. Remember the whole idea of the pact, that we have to be told what's going to happen? But if it's told to us in a right brain way, we're very likely to dismiss it and then be complicit in our own slaughter and control. And we would do well as human beings to pay more attention to that which seems innocuous, all the different customs and rites and rituals that have come down to us from antiquity. Why is it, for instance, that we are interred in the earth at our own funeral? What is this idea of being put into the earth at death? Where does that come from? We have mythologies of the dwarves and the Scandinavian king under the mountain. Very, very powerful mythological motifs. We have to look into this whole concept of hell and the legends of Hades, Avernus, Tartarus, the idea of the inferno, the abyss, the purgatory, Anwin in the Welsh mythologies, the bottomless pit. We know that these all originate from the time of the first deluge. But why is it that the ancients in the Bible are so emphatic about the fact that there is a hollow earth and that there's caves and internment? So then the question then arises, if these tombs, underground tombs exist, where are they? And has the secret of these locations been kept in antiquity? We know that since the advent of the satellites, that the entire earth can be mapped, and that we've seen even pictures of underground rivers being mapped and charted and lost cities. And certainly it's possible through the technology to physically now locate graves which may have been interned and may have been covered over by cities and deserts for many thousands of years. Now we certainly know that the forces that be can position those again, even if they didn't already have maps to do so. Religion, the concept of the resurrection, and I want to emphasize that what are we talking about when we actually hearing about resurrection? When we take away all the gloss and all the posy and all the wishful thinking, the word literally means not reincarnation, but resurrection, the body itself rising from the dead. I mean, the Christians are absolutely adamant on this and go to great lengths to tell you that this is not spiritual. This is a physical act. Graves are literally opening. Individuals are coming to life. You know, frightening to even think about what that would really mean. But there you have it. And the occult books, the occult lore, the occult literature, and occult principles also talk about the fact that these undead, meaning that they're not dead in the usual sense that we would understand. I mean, we only have to look to the vampire myths. Vampire myths go back a long way. And we're told, there's a lot of emphasis, that the individuals are not dead, but they're what's called the undead, sort of inhabiting a kind of a suspended state in between two worlds, in some way suspended and able to come and go. And the occult principles talk about the fact that, like any vampire, there needs to be feeding. And we already understand that John Dee put the entire world up in a blood ritual pact to his macrobes. Well, there's another dimension to this. Could not the deaths and mortality and wars and violence and criminality and just the release of tension at the time of certain assassinations, these assassinations are known often to be done on specific areas, like Lady Diana Spencer in Paris and JFK in Dallas. There's certain geometry involved in these killings. And then what happens emotionally when it comes across the television and the media, and everyone bleeds off all of this emotion from the most incredible computer or organic battery that exists, the human mind. Where's all that energy going? Where's all this tension and frustration and stress going? And why have we got a culture that is schizogenic, creating all of this? All we know is that down through time we have had the most atrocious events going on, massive deaths, suicides like Guyana, enormous staged events, televised megadeath, incidents like Waco and Heaven's Gate and the Columbine massacre and so on. And we have wars, all highly staged, highly publicized. Is there something occult going on behind all of this? Now it turns out that these so-called underground chambers are not ordinary. They were constructed using pure charged crystals and other magical techniques to help attract, contain, and generate the energy released through the grid. The energy that we release kinetically, the fear, the stress, the repressed angers and so on, and all the sadism that arises, and the whole cocktail of emotions. This energy grid picks it up in exactly the same way that electricity works, like magnetism works. Enters into the grid and then pours into these chambers to feed the undead, to feed these individuals who thrive off of this. And we have to look at the terms again. It's very important to look at the real meaning of the word nuclear war and atomic war. and Cold War and Star Wars. I go into this in the book, that these are talking about the inner biology of human beings, is it not? I mean, it's not a stretch to understand that the nuclear and atom are things within. The war is really an inner war, as opposed to bombs dropping from the skies. And so the daily diet of news, full of horror and injustice, is indeed a diet. This is what we have to understand. It serves to stimulate and generate precisely the kind of emotional reactions required to sustain the demonic presences which prey over us. The news and newspapers, read by everyone everywhere, fill readers and audiences with dread, fear, and futility. These soft reactions still drain energy from the erstwhile victim. The energy released from your own living room is conducted via the ambient electromagnetism into the earth grid. Large doses of fear, trepidation, and agony were released during the 9/11 disaster, September 11th, not only from New York, but all over the world. This event was staged at the site of a powerful vortex or synchronic line. August 31st, another very important occult date, 1997, a famous assassination. Tremendous occult principles involved. Just as a case in point, for those who are interested, 100 years to the day, August 31st again, Jack the Ripper took his first victim in that series of ritual deaths. And those deaths have been clearly brought to the door of the royal family in England by Stephen Knight. Stephen Knight, who wrote the book The Brotherhood, absolutely clearly shows you that this was by royal appointment. And Stephen Knight died mysteriously 2 years after his book was written. November 22nd, the 13th sign of the zodiac, Sagittarius, the most important occult position of the zodiac. We have a very famous assassination, and the symbolism is incredible. The cenotaph that was built for Kennedy has 13 levels. It was the assassination was at the junction of 3 roads. It was on the 33rd meridian of the Earth. The 33rd meridian of the Earth is very important to occult societies and Freemasons, those who are into the know in these subjects. Now, the geographical latitude of Jerusalem and the Temple Mount lies between the 31st and 32nd degree parallels, with the latter passing just south of the Holy City. It has also been remarked that the Mother Lodge of the Scottish Rite Supreme Council of the 33rd degree was located in the city of Charleston in South Carolina, probably because the 33rd degree parallel passes almost right through it. Most of the banks of the world, the stately homes, parks, a lot of the atomic and detonations, also a lot of the wars have gone on between the 30th and 33rd parallel of the Earth. These are important zones on the Earth. Now, the rape of the planet Earth, the pollution, the desecration of oceans, the forests and jungles and atmosphere is all part of this preparation for the arising. It's not by accident that we seem to be so ecocidal when it comes to our own planet. There's no occult agenda behind that. The pirates devastating the whole of the land, and the Hudson Bay companies, all by royal appointment, the Virginia Company, the East India Company. We have a wholesale rape going on and a wholesale slaughter of people in the world. And we have it in our modern age. If beings are about to arise, if there's a final solution going on, if it's getting late in the day, and these children of the Nephilim are not able to break through the Stargate, and they are even turning to their final solution, which is to disinter, to reawaken, either genetically or in some other means, these ancient beings, and turn the problem over to them 11,000 years or more later. These individuals are going to want feeding, just like at the time of any hatching of any animal. There's a greater need for blood, a greater need for energy. And it is my thesis that we talk about, that one of the grave sites is in the Middle East, in Iraq, probably not far from Baghdad, in Asia Minor. It's very likely that one of the tombs or underground cenotaphs or mausoleums or whatever you want to call it is in the Middle East. And that's part of the reason why we're moving in that area. I know that there are places of trouble in the world, like Lebanon, and also Northern Ireland, for instance. In Ireland, our mythologies are absolutely loaded with information about Kronos, the great god, being taken to Ireland and chained there and interred there. We have grave sites spanning acres and acres of land in different parts of Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland, which are known to be the internment places of giants and of gods and of evil ones and so on. This is something that's very familiar in the mythological canon. And we only have to look to the video games and even to movies to see how common it is to see underworld motifs. Some entire movies are situated underground. But again, it becomes so innocuous to us that it's almost invisible. We actually don't think what is actually going on here. Now, the disinterment of the alien original masters is, as I said, the final solution, the big plan. But the individuals who are in charge of this, who can orchestrate wars and global chaos in order to facilitate this, those who can rape temples and museums in order to get the artifacts together to perform these bizarre rituals, they also have a lot of backup plans. They know that what happens if plan A doesn't go right? Well, we have, plan B, C, D, all the way down to Z, all separately funded master plans in order to back up the original, just in case there should be a problem. These are individuals who don't work like us. These are individuals who control the very ship of state and have 10, 20-year plans. And these backup plans are an interesting study in themselves. We only have time to look at a few. One of the ancient structures that could be used in this revivification process is the Great Pyramid at Giza. It was known by those who've made a study of the principles of the pyramid and its construction and its interior, know that it was used for healing and used for reconstitution of the body, and that certain monatomic substances were taken within its precinct, and that it generates certain kinds of energy and frequencies that are very helpful in the restoration process. It's a sort of a channel not only of cosmic energies but of earth-based energies. It's almost like the perfect incubation place. And we hear that there's a 22-foot wall presently in the construction phases around the Giza pyramid. There's a lot of activity, both by the Egyptian government, the Egyptian military, and the rest of the world. And certainly secret societies have always used the symbol of the pyramid and are busy creating railway structures, possibly in order to vehicleize that when these individuals are disinterred. I mean, the whole of Iraq, you could not move in to Iraq and just simply send a bunch of technicians and start to disinter without everybody in the region looking over your shoulder. And unfortunately, when we look at the Muslim population of these countries, I have to say it, those individuals who are caught in their religious orthodox fundamentalist belief systems, they're not going to understand any of this. They're not even, the Iraq people, the Iranians are not aware of their own ancient traditions in the same way that the Celtic people, the Irish people are not aware of their Celtic legends. Why should they be? They've got their religion and that's happy. They wouldn't even know what's happening 14 feet beneath the ground. They don't care necessarily about some of their own ancient and pagan history. But for some reason, the Western powers have seen fit not just to do this thing secretly or get the complicity of these sovereign governments. The idea here is to completely decimate the entire country and to own it so that this kind of work can go on uninterrupted. So serious it is. And if phase one in these laboratories over there doesn't work, then these beings, these bodies can be moved. We have lots of research in the world regarding the digging up of the pharaohs and checking out the DNA of the pharaohs, and we're not really understanding why millions of dollars should be spent on such preposterous research, and yet now we understand there's a reason for this. Now, one of the most important things to take on board regarding prophecy, the prophetic aspect of this, and why there would be suddenly at this particular date and time in the early part of this millennium such saber-rattling declarations of war, and why it is that the vanguard of the West are returning back to the Middle East, whether one buys into an occult agenda in the molestation of these countries or the robbing of the museums and so on, or not. We have to understand that the Mayan prophecies are talking about time is very short. Let's for a moment imagine that, yes, some great time of ending is approaching us. We are hearing cosmological reports and of alignments, planetary alignments, We're also hearing of the photon belt. Some scholars are saying that in the years leading up to 2012, we're going to have what is known as photonic energy. This is the planet Earth being washed in photonic energy. Photonic energy is the highest form of light that is known physically. We all know about light. Well, the highest form of light that can manifest physically is photonic. Photonics is discharge from the movement of the electron on an atomic level. And there is purported to be a large belt of photonic energy that every period of certain age will come in which the whole, not just the planet, but the whole solar system will pass through, almost like a car wash. The whole solar system moving through a high radiation of photonic energy. And if this is the case, this could be one of the reasons it's precipitating the acceleration, the speed, the need of the progeny of the Atlanteans to vacate the planet. Because photonic energy has certain principles. From Barbara Hahn Clow's book, The Palladian Agenda, we find that Robert Stanley, who reported on the discovery of the photon band by satellites in 1991, and he commented, these excesses of photons are being emitted from the center of our galaxy. Our solar system enters the area of our galaxy every 11,000 years and then passes through for 2,000 years while completing its 26,000 year galactic orbit. Noel Huntley, in his book The Photon Belt Encounter, says, by means of satellite instrumentation, astronomers in 1961 discovered what appeared to be an unusual nebula. We normally understand the nebula phenomena as a vast, cloud-like mass of gas or dust. This one, however, appeared to have anomalous properties and was named the Golden Nebula. The public's attention was not drawn to this unusual revelation until much later, presumably when it was realized that this nebula's location was coincident with the projected orbit of our solar system. Around the early 1980s, a radio announcement in the US was made that our solar system was, in fact, going to collide with an electromagnetic cloud in the not too distant future. Now, the photon effect is caused by the precession of our solar system and its accompanying planets around the central sun called Alcyon, located in the constellation of the Pleiades. This counter-clockwise cyclic precession around Alcyon requires about 25,860 years to make one complete orbit. Our present-day sun, moon, and planets must twice pass through the photon belt during this time. That is, once to the north and once to the south. During this cycle, there are 2 periods of darkness and 2 periods of light. The periods of darkness, which constitute the vast majority of the rotation around the central sun, consist of 2 periods of about 10,500 years. Following each period of 10,500 years of darkness, then we emerge into 2,000 years of total light, which actually constitutes the photon belt. Simply put, we have a cycle lasting about 26,000 years. And for most of this cycle, we're, as we are now, in a period of darkness. And then for about 2,000 years on each side, because of course of any circle, there is the 12 o'clock position and the 6 o'clock position, the north and the south nodes. And at each of these nodes of the cycle, the solar system will pass through for 2,000 years the photonic energy band. Now, of course, one can get into all sorts of criticisms and arguments regarding this concept. I, for one, am a little skeptical, not about the fact there's a photon belt, but that the fact that there's such a thing as static, repeating cycles. This is, again, part of the old Newtonian closed universe mindset. Perhaps there is a photon action, and perhaps there are these cycles, but perhaps they're based more on a Fibonacci series, like all organic things in the universe are based on the Fibonacci series. So perhaps to talk about fixed cycles that repeat ad infinitum down through the generations is perhaps not so accurate or true. But these are points that should be left aside for now. Now, the photon belt was discovered, as we said, in 1961 by satellite-borne instruments. It comes around every 10,000 years and lasts for 2,000 years. Each is thought to, Earth is thought to have entered the outer perimeter in 1962. But again, that's open to speculation. Different authors say different things. However, if the Earth and the solar system was to approach or enter into the photonic energy, our sun's radiation would be dramatically altered. the electrons would be affected, and they will generate photonic radiation. So whether we're entering a belt of radiation or whether some other activity or movement or dynamic affects the electrons within our planet, within our atmosphere, within the atomic frequency, then there's photonic energy released. I mean, there's a speculation on exactly how these photonic particles will start to act and operate. And if the sun enters the belt first, it will disappear, and we on the planet Earth will be left in total darkness for a while. If the Earth moves in first, then the mythologies of the world say that the entire sky will appear to be on fire, and we hear this concept in mythology and in the legends. Now, all things, once this photonic energy starts, all things will emit light and phosphorescence, and darkness will simply not exist. There'll be an effulgence. I mean, you can't have all the atomic energy, the atomic particles releasing photonic energy, and nothing will happen. Claiming your hands, your body, the trees, you know, the very rocks, all the particles will start to emit this effulgence. And of course, those who understand the metaphysical principles of light, this matters greatly. Because light is not just something that helps you see. It's not just a sensual thing. Light is very much connected spiritually and in the mythologies and in the religious canon to development, spiritual enlightenment, purity, sanctity. So is this what the Bible and the mythologies were talking about? That as our planet moves through photonic energy, there's also an enlightening process that goes on. Well, if that's the case, I would have a question. Every time that we turn a bright light on us, the dirt tends to shine up more. We tend to see the dirt more clearly. So is this what the children of the Nephilim and the immoral ones, the ones who've steeped our world in a sea of blood, are worrying about? The individuals whose constitution, whose psyche is vile and immoral and criminal and unjust? Is that what is precipitating these end days? Is that what the Maya calendar perhaps is talking about and warning us? That the coming of this photonic light is literally like the roach cleaner on his way. The car is going through the car wash. Then what? Is this the spin-dry cycle for the earth? All things organic? Knowing how to clean themselves? Everything in our life we cleanse. Well, does the planet have its own clean cycle? There's also talk that the codons within the DNA will upgrade from 22 codons to the 64. So the DNA, there'll be changes within the biology and the DNA, and also the consciousness. And the spiritual people who've researched yoga and the subtle body understand that we have what's called a light body. And that light body is also connected to radiation and to the photonic radiation. And Deepak Chopra says it this way: photons come out of nowhere. They cannot be stored, they can barely be pinned down in time, and they have no home in space whatsoever. That is, light occupies no volume and has no mass. The similarity between a thought and a photon is very deep. Both are born in the region beyond space and time where nature controls all processes that in that void, which is full of creative intelligence. The massive cycle that we're talking about of 25,000 years and so has often been termed the Leviathan cycle, and again is symbolized strangely by a dragon or a reptile or a fish encircling the earth. Cycles were often shown this way, in figurative ways, by the ancients, of a large coiling encircling dragon or a band. Virgil Armstrong says that following each period of 10,500 years of darkness, and he's talking more here about spiritual darkness again, we then emerge into 2,000 years of total light, which actually constitutes the photon belt. We then have 21,860 years of darkness and 4,000 years of light if you take it together. Another way of viewing this phenomena is that in one complete orbit we have 5/6 darkness and approximately 1/6 light, or a 5-to-1 ratio, with darkness being predominant. Surprisingly enough, we are now once again emerging from the 10,000 plus years of darkness and preparing to emerge into 2,000 years of light, which will begin to experience that in around the year 2000, he says. But what I want to draw attention to right here is this whole idea of the 5-to-1. It's very important to understand that the pentagram is, in a way, a cryptic symbol for that. And we've been talking a lot about the symbol of the pentagram and how it's used on many mega corporations and military establishments and on flags and on symbols. And that, of course, represents the 5 around the 1, which is being used in magic. Now, another important cycle here, as an alternative theory to the photonic energy, or perhaps a compatible one, is the idea in 2012 that the sun aligns with what is known as the galactic central point. The galactic central point, or the center of the galaxy, is very, very important not only to astronomers but to the ancients. Again, I have to stress how important these cosmological events and phenomena were to ancient men. And of course we hear about astrology and different conjunctions and different aspects. We have the 12 signs of the zodiac. But in the sign of the zodiac known as Sagittarius, close to Capricorn, close to the winter solstice, is galactic center. The pole of the Earth literally facing galactic center. It's one of the original reasons why Sagittarius was shown as an archer. Why is he holding that bow and where's that arrow facing? The sign of Sagittarius and the archer and his bow and his arrow was meant to face what we know as galactic center. Those who've studied the occult history of astrology and astrotheology will know what this means. Safe it is to say that galactic center runs through the constellation that we know as Sagittarius. And of course, being the background of the night stars, the planets and the stars are seen to move, especially the planets, are seen to move in front of the backdrop of the night sky. And around December 21st, 2012, the sun itself on the December 21st, which is of course the solstice, is meant to rise. And when it rises, when we first start to see it in the morning, it will be back of galactic center. Now this is what is called an alignment, a planetary alignment. And this is considered of supreme importance, this particular alignment. And many researchers are pointing to this, as opposed to the photon belt, to be a significant factor in the end days. And the Mayans, they knew all about it. According to Carlos Barrios in his Mayan calendar, The World Will Not End, he says, Maya day keepers viewed December 21st, 2012 as a rebirth. It will be the start of a new era resulting from and signified by the solar meridian crossing the galactic equator and the Earth aligning itself with the center of the galaxy. At sunrise on December 21st, 2012, for the first time in 26,000 years, the sun rises to conjunct the intersection of the Milky Way and the plane of the ecliptic. This cosmic cross is considered to be an embodiment of the sacred tree, the tree of life, a tree remembered in all the world's spiritual traditions. Some observers say this alignment with the heart of the galaxy in 2012 will open a channel for cosmic energy to flow through the Earth, cleansing it and all that dwells upon it, raising all to a higher level of vibration. So here again, the Maya talking about the constellational aspects and the idea of alignments involving the Earth and the Sun and the galactic center and the Milky Way. We don't have time here to go into the symbolism of the Milky Way, especially from an Egyptian standpoint. It was of supreme importance, running as it does from Gemini all the way through the zodiac into Sagittarius. The river of the Pharaoh, that the Ra and Horus and their little boat would sail down the river Styx, which of course was just a symbol for the Milky Way, on their way to galactic center, the portal from our world, our dimension, into the spirit. Very important significance here. Now, John Major Jenkins, in his book Maya, Cosmogenesis, the Maya were aware of our solstice sun's impending alignment with galactic plane and galactic center, an astronomical alignment that occurs only once every 13,000 years. I have honestly documented my encounter with this idea and have gone deep into the academic literature to decode how this end date alignment scenario, what I call the galactic cosmology, was incorporated into basic Maya institutions such as the ball game, the king ascension rites, and the Maya creation myth. This amazing fact that ancient Mesoamerican sky watchers were able to pinpoint a winter solstice far off into the future has not been dealt with by Mayanists. And why did they choose the year 2012? One immediately gets the impression that there is a very strange mystery to be confronted here. Why did early Mesoamerican sky watchers pick a date some 2,300 years into the future? And in fact, how did they pinpoint an accurate winter solstice? With all these considerations, one begins to suspect that for some reason the ancient New World astronomers were tracking precession. So John Major Jenkins asks a bunch of questions here, the age-old questions about how did they know? They lived years ago. But wait a minute, he's dating the Maya from 2,300 years? That's just been shot to pieces recently when we've discovered that their ancestors from whom they got this knowledge go back millennia more. And that's why we've been spending so much time in this show to point out the reasons of how this ancestral knowledge came down to us. That we're not talking about primitive individuals who were scratching this together. We're talking about incredibly advanced civilizations who it was the simplest conception, the simplest, easiest thing to see off into the future. And of course, if you buy into the idea that these were visitors from other planets, then these Maya predictions are not so much predictions, but clear prophecies of a text that has been lived out, a narrative. Well, if you've created the story, you know what the end chapter is going to be. In 2012, the plane of our solar system will line up exactly with the plane of our galaxy, the Milky Way. This cycle has taken 26,000 years to complete. This alignment was recorded by the Maya, whose calendar was said to arise from a phenomenon referred to as the sacred tree, a central motif of the Maya creation myths. This says Linda Shield. The god of the sun, that's Pakal, Lord Ahu, was depicted as entering into this tree during his death. The incredible Maya site of Palenque is filled with sacred tree motifs and references to astronomical events. In their book Forest of Kings, Shield and Friedel suggest that the sacred tree referred to is the ecliptic. Apparently, that was only part of the picture, for the sacred tree that Pakal ascends in death is more than just the ecliptic. It is the sacred doorway to the underworld. The crossing point of Milky Way and ecliptic is the doorway and represents the sacred source and origin. Now, when a planet, the sun or the moon, entered the dark cleft of the Milky Way in Sagittarius, which happens to be the exact center of the Milky Way, the galactic equator, entrance to the underworld road was possible, which could then take a journeyer up into the heart of the sky. This road has been called by different names: the Dark Road, the Road to Xibalba, the Camino de Santiago, and the Crossroads. It is really where the galactic center crosses the ecliptic in Sagittarius. The fall equinox sun conjuncted the sacred tree about 6,400 years ago. That's a quarter of the precessional cycle. Ancient cultures in Mesopotamia may have recognized this alignment and called it the Golden Age. The fall from this state of alignment may be responsible for the original fall from paradise myth, which filtered out into the Judaic tradition. Terence McKenna demonstrates that on winter solstice of 2012, galactic center will be rising heliacally, that's with the sun, just before dawn. And one of the most interesting points also is that remote viewers, clairvoyants, divination readers, what have you, they're also reporting that they cannot see a future beyond the end date of 2012. It's kind of perplexing. And more specifically, when we turn to the Maya, for every day of any one of their cycles, the Maya are known to have had a little prediction, a little divination reading, same as you'd see in the newspaper. But when we look to the divination readings that come for after 2012, there aren't any. There's only one, I think, for that day. We have Ahu, that's the sun. Ajpu is the light from which we emerge, and the light to which we all return. So this is the first line of their prediction for December 21st, 2012. The light from which we emerge, and the light to which we all will return. A year of the vision of the eagle and its connection with grandfather sun and the solar mind. The Lord of the age of flowers, balance in the material and physical worlds. Strong, intelligent, hardworking, yet tender and brave. This year anchors a spiritual certainty and the understanding of cycles of time and the interdependence of all living things. It offers us the ability to use the creative power of the universe. We will pass many tests of the mind and will. Remember to act from trust and let go of the belief in struggle. So one could go into every single one of those lines and thoroughly decode it metaphysically, because there's a lot of information in that little reading concerning light and uplift and living in harmony and whatnot. Now, Stephen Hanawar says, it appears that we are soon heading towards something wonderful and very significant during this critical time for humanity. We have an opportunity to raise the conscious vibration of humanity as a whole to a new high. It is completely up to us. We can be a chosen one by preparing ourselves physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. We Americans in particular have been lulled into a dreamlike state, believing since the 1940s that the opulent lifestyle we've grown accustomed to could be maintained indefinitely with no detrimental effects to the planet or our souls. The day of reckoning is near. It's time to either voluntarily awaken from the dream and change, or be abruptly and swiftly awakened, possibly too late. We have accomplished great things through our technology, but due to its misuse and overuse, we have nearly destroyed life on this planet. The Earth will survive, but we may not, at least in the physical dimension. Our technological means has exceeded our spiritual awareness and understanding, for example, with nuclear bombs, genetic engineering, and time traveling. Now, the 12-strand RNA or DNA system will have replaced our body's current 2-strand system, some are saying. We will have increased our 7-chakra system of body energy vortexes to a 13-chakra system. We will also consciously use 100% of our brain. Instead of the 10 to 20% currently utilized, full consciousness will return to us. These are some hypotheses that are being put before us by individuals within the metaphysical and spiritual communities, that the end date of 2012 signals major changes positively for consciousness. But again, as I repeat, before you can have the light, or when you have bright light, the first thing you notice is the dirt. So maybe there's also a catabolic season or a catabolic dimension to all of this, where we have to really confront some of our demons and some of our negative aspects and purge that first before we can move on and be in the light, so to speak. Dr. George W. Crowell, he says, of the Cleveland Laboratories, announced that he had discovered at the heart of every living organism a tiny nucleus of energy, all aglow, with temperatures ranging from 3,000 to 6,000 degrees of heat, which he called radiogens, or hot points, precisely akin to the radiant energy of solar matter. He affirmed that a tiny particle of the sun's power and radiance was lodged within the heart of every organic unit. And is that not what we've been told, figuratively and poetically and spiritually in the great scriptures of old, that man, the temple of God, is within, that he is the light? Was that not the message of not only Christ, but the Buddha and the other great mystics of the world? That man is the light of the universe? Now, of course, we're on the countdown time clock to these end dates, and if there is going to be some kind of social catharsis or even individual cleansing, we have to look at some of the forms that that could take, and also some of the consequences that could happen when individuals are forced to confront and examine and also exercise some of the dark aspects of their own psyche. And we also know that there's presences on this planet who would just be very much enjoying that kind of release, as we saw earlier on, and may in fact be working to precipitate it. Are there other things that we should know about the permutations and the nuances of these coming cleansing cycles? Well, Richard Allen Miller and Iona Miller, in the Nexus magazine interview, they also say that for epochs, Schumann resonances have provided the orchestrating pulse for life on this planet, our planetary heartbeat, which sets the tempo for health and well-being. ELF frequencies of Schumann's resonance are intimately linked with those of human brain waves. Naturally or artificially induced changes in the Schumann resonance could affect the subtle and perhaps gross brainwave generation. Liquid crystals, and that could be the DNA, the brain ventricles, the cellular structure in the human body, may operate as antenna for detecting and decoding such global and local ELF signals. So they're talking about this incredible symbiosis between the human body, the vibrations of the human body, the cellular makeup of the human body, and the earth, and these very important Schumann waves and resonances and the Hartmann waves, the heartbeat of the earth. There is a rapport that needs to be taken into consideration. They say there is a harmonic relationship between the earth and our mind and body. Earth's low-frequency isoelectric field, the magnetic field of the earth, and the electrostatic field that emerges from our bodies are closely interwoven. Our internal rhythms interact with external rhythms, affecting our balance, our REM patterns, and mental focus. Or is it the other way around? Are the mental, emotional, and psychological states of human beings causing the changes in the electromagnetism of the planet? That's exactly what Wilhelm Reich and some of the major students of this subject would certainly have believed. Because again, our materialistic background would tell us, oh, it's all environment, it's all the external changes in this objective reality, then the human being is affected by it. Like consciousness is secondary, consciousness is subservient. But as we're discovering more and more about the actual connections between consciousness and the world, between psychic energy and physical energy, we're starting to understand, as the magicians and alchemists of the old understood, that consciousness has a lot more power over matter than we have thought before. Consciousness is the dominant one. So could it not be that consciousness itself is the trigger in this situation, as opposed to just us passively changing because something in the external world is changing? Now, Stephen Hanauer goes on to say the Maya calendar is the only calendar known to be based on galactic cycles. The Mayans claimed they created this calendar in order to monitor the light coming from the center of the galaxy and how it affected our DNA. We now know through the work of Fritz Popp that DNA not only absorbs lights but also emits light. DNA also appears to be the bridge between our physical and etheric bodies. Modern science now realizes that our DNA directly reflects our consciousness, making it possible for us to willfully change our DNA. Now, Earth's background base frequency, or heartbeat, called the Schumann resonance, or SR, is rising dramatically. Though it varies among geographical regions, for decades the overall measurement was 7.8 cycles per second. This was once thought to be a constant. Recent reports set the rate at over 11 cycles and climbing. Science doesn't know why or what to make of it. Well, Wilhelm Reich would be asserting that it's these changes in consciousness that are causing it. And that is a very important concept. It constitutes a flip in the normal attitudes and the normal thinking that we have. Now, the collapse of the Earth's magnetic field, which both guards the planet and guides many of its creatures, appears to have started in earnest about 150 years ago, the New York Times is planning to report. Science reporter Bill Broad has filed a report which explores how the field strength has waned 10% to 15% so far, and this deterioration has accelerated of late, increasing debate over whether it portends a reversal of the lines of magnetic force that normally envelop the Earth. Broad explains, during a reversal, the main field weakens, almost vanishes, and then reappears with opposite polarity. Afterward, compass needles that normally point north would point south, and during the thousands of years of transition, much in the heavens and Earth would go askew. Broad claims a reversal could knock out power grids, hurt astronauts and satellites, widen atmospheric ozone holes, send polar auroras flashing to the equator, and confuse birds, fish, and migratory animals that rely on the steadiness of the magnetic field as a navigation aid. Now, Jerry Smith, in his harp, The Ultimate Weapon of the Conspiracy, also is worried about the powers that be compounding this problem and trying to affect human behavior. He says, could you control people if you could project holographic images into the sky, pictures of the gods they worship or of the demons they fear most? The Air Force thinks so, and they are actively pursuing holographic projectors as weapons system. What could you do if you could transmit words or thoughts directly into their minds? Could you not bend them to your bidding unawares or drive them insane with voices, quote unquote? So here we have government agendas and government black budget operations involving what they call entrainment, which is using electromagnetic frequencies and radiotronic weaponry to actually change mental functioning and mental thinking. Would that not be one of the policies that could be used when the children of the Nephilim are aware that the end days are coming? How do you keep people in control? How do you feed the microbes? How do you make sure that nobody knows what's really going on? And how do you bleed off yet more energy for your own purposes? And we talked about outcome number 2. What would happen if the children of the Nephilim understand that even with all the technology rebuilt and great successes in that area, it is simply impossible to break through the Stargate, and that they're interned here into the bottomless pit. And then they come out into the open, start ruling the human race out in the open with unmitigated tyranny, using these kinds of weaponry now to just dominate and control and incarcerate and murder. Changes within the mental reactions of humans, whether induced artificially or not, may precipitate the so-called earth changes, and specifically the photonic reaction. So In my book, I'm discussing this idea from the mental side, that perhaps it's not the case of the planet Earth going through photonic energy bands and then something just happening to us. Perhaps it's something within our own consciousness, within the collective unconscious, that is going to precipitate changes within what we think is external phenomena. The resulting anarchy, nihilism and debauchery, the loss of moral prohibitions, as well as certainty and normalcy, will trigger mass insanity on a global level. The return of the repressed content will mean loss of neocortical intelligence and prefrontal censoring. As the higher centers of psyche suffer trauma and overload, we will see man regressing to a limbic form of consciousness. Now, we see chaos of unimaginable proportions just for almost the slightest thing. There's an old saying that people are 3 meals away from revolution. It doesn't take much to trigger incredible scenes of rioting and chaos and frenetic behavior and debauchery. History is full of it. But what would happen if there's a full-on onslaught, not just of entrainment and radiotronic invasion into our psyche, but also, say, there is a natural cleansing cycle that's approaching us. The Mayans are convinced of it. The ancient prophets are convinced of these times. And it all boils down to the fact that we haven't done our inner spiritual cleansing and our inner spiritual homework. Barbara Hand-Clow says, "You all have miasmas in your bodies that you must release. These are etheric masses that hold memory of genetic past life disease patterns. These miasmas are being intensively activated by the photon band since March 14th, 1994. And the prophets had much to say on this very subject of the decline and fall. Pastor Bartholomeus in 1638 said, "A great change will come to pass, such as no mortal man will have expected. Heaven and hell will confront each other in this struggle. Old states will perish and light and darkness will be pitted against each other with swords. But it will be swords of a different fashion. With these swords it will be possible to cut up the skies and to split the earth. A great lament will come over all mankind, and only a small batch will survive the tempest, the pestilence, and the horror." Different swords, different weaponry. Is that what the prophets are warning us against? And in many movies it's almost a perennial feature. Not only Blade Runner, but Mad Max, but Lord of the Rings, and even Children of the Damned, and many other movies, Underworld, are all featuring Judge Dredd, featuring the end of times and the nihilism in the streets and a police state. If we watch movies like Free Jack, Hollywood is always mulling over this concept of the end times, the debauchery and nihilism that has been spoken of even by philosophers such as Nietzsche and so on. Now, there are also corresponding cycles of importance to take into consideration. Stephen Hanauer mentioned some of these. He says that Nick Fiorenza has determined that the Earth and the Sun will be aligning with the center of the galaxy sometime between 1999 and 2000. The equatorial plane of the Earth, known as the ecliptic, aligns with the ecliptic of the Sun at the same time that they both align with the ecliptic of the galactic core. This unique alignment occurs only 4 times during the precession of the equinox cycle, corresponding with the 4 corners of the world. The last configuration similar to this upcoming alignment corresponds to around 9,500 BC. He believes that there will be another major Earth changes as the time of the sinking of Atlantis and the Great Flood, but with one addition, that being a possible dimension shift. We also hear about the astrological transition from the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius. The signs of the zodiac come about because of the crossing of what they call the ecliptic and the celestial equator. And at these cross points we have the vernal equinoxes, the autumnal equinox, the summer solstice, and the winter solstice. And in between those we have the 12 signs of the zodiac. And the sun, of course, passes backwards through these signs of the zodiac. It takes 2,160 years to pass through one sign of the zodiac. And it takes 25,920 to go through the entire 12 signs of the zodiac backwards. This backwards movement is called the precession of the equinox. The sun moves backwards, but it appears that the zodiac moves from the west to the east. Now presently, the sun is in the last degrees of the sign of Pisces, moving close to the sign we know as Aquarius. And if it was to move into the sign of Aquarius, after 30 degrees of each sign, then we would be in what is called or referred to as the age of Aquarius. And the Bible, albeit in cryptic language, speaks about these ages or these houses. For instance, in John 14 we read, "In my Father's house are many mansions, and I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there ye may be also." Well, how can there be many mansions in a house? This is, again, a euphemism for the houses of the zodiac, and the 12 apostles of Jesus Christ are also considered that. Now, competent astrologers know that the negative traits associated with the sign of Pisces, this is the age that we've been in for over 2,000 years, concern deception, vice, hidden agendas, mass delusion, and the misuse of spiritual virtue and power. These are the negative traits we associate with the sign of Pisces. Every sign of the zodiac, just like every symbol and sign, has both positive and negative connotations. And these are the negative ones of Pisces. So in the age of Pisces, it was to be expected that the world would experience its share of these negatives on a macrocosmic level. As the age of Pisces comes to a close, the deceivers know that a paradigm shift which will occur does not favor their machinations. This understanding has led them to make many subtle alterations to their age-old stratagems. The study and tracking of these expedient accommodations prompted by astromantic and cosmological phase shifts amounts to an entire subject in itself. But what we can understand is that the ancients understood that the sun moves through the 12 signs of the zodiac very gradually backwards in the precession of the equinox, and that each time it moves into a different house, a new mythology is needed, a new set of symbols. In the age of Pisces, the mythographers, the powers that be, understand that we're coming to a cusp point, and there's going to be a sizable shift. I mean, after all, in astrology, Pisces is a mutable water sign. Aquarius is a fixed air sign. There's going to be changes, quantum shifts in consciousness. And the powers that be, who know how to track these enormous epochal changes, understand that there's going to be a need to revise some of their own mythologies, and operating manuals, operating procedures will have to change. And the age of Aquarius is said to begin, nobody knows quite for sure, but they think it's to begin in AD 2740. However, as the sun moves towards the final degrees of the previous sign, the descendants of the great cults of power who are at the helm of the religions and governments need to make arrangements for that change. As each age terminates, the appointed mythographers have to get ready to script new mythologies consistent with the complex symbolism of the coming age. Their work is analogous to the Madison Avenue ad man, only their hot product is literally the New World Order. The end of an age is always distinguished by orchestrated chaos and conflagration. This is the true meaning of Armageddon. And it was known not just of this age of 2,000 years, but of all the ages, that when you come to the cusp point or approach it, there will be trials and tribulations attending the transition. So is this what we're heading towards? The cusp point of one zodiacal age into another? At the beginning, we promised to get to solutions, pointing out that the 21st century is a time for solution think, as opposed to the previous millennia and the previous ages, which have definitely been more about the problem think. If we have any of these problems that we've been canvassing and demonstrating and showing, we need to be able to understand that we can fix it. The human being can take care of any problem. When you understand what the problem is, the next phase is solutions. So what are the solutions to the political and social and psychological issues that attend us today? Well, first of all, what are the reasons for the state that we find ourselves in? In an American context, we understand that from a historical point of view, America is moving from infancy to adolescence. It is really experiencing its puberty and all of the different dysfunctions that attend that stage. We also understand that freedom and individuality are virtues which really must be earned. I understood this very much from an Irish context, where freedom and democracy and so on is something that has to be struggled for. It's not just given to you by your oppressors and by your leaders. It's something that you're going to have to demand in order to receive. I mean, even the driving, to have a driving license and to drive a car, is considered by the state to be a privilege and not your right. So we have to earn, and that's what we're seeing in the world today, is individuals having to find out what it means to be free. And as I said, we are now approaching the right time for all of this. The time of the past was not the time for solution think, but now the time has come. One of the other major setbacks and things we have to understand is that political action is erroneously been favored over legal. In our world today, it's often advanced to us that if you want to remedy a situation, well, you just get involved in politics. Well, as we've been seeing from this show and from also this series, that is simply not true. The whole political architecture has been created to purposely disempower you by allowing you to think that you have some power. Okay, yes, of course, on the street level, certain things get remedied, but who created those problems in the first place? Maybe perhaps as this millennium proceeds, we're going to understand that the political arena is actually a den of pigs. It's not something that ever fixes the major problems, but that of the two systems, the ones that we do have within our power, perhaps more legal know-how, legal empowerment is the key. I mean, legal power certainly used on us when the system comes after us. They're not too interested in what political party we belong to when they're kicking down our doors ready to drag us off, or when the IRS are coming in, or the state is coming in, or when the police are harassing us. They don't care if you're a Republican, Democrat, or Conservative, or Labour. It is a legal apparatus that is now being used against you. Well, maybe we need to realize, hey, we can use that on our side also, and put our energy into that rather than into waving placards and joining political parties. And ultimately, as we've just seen in the last phase, the need to spiritually heal and psychologically cleanse. This undergirds everything else. The whole idea of healing the self, healing one's own mind, must come before the attempt, even the simple attempt, to try and heal the wounds of society or humanity. This was also a message brought out in the Bible, that you need to be able to see clearly yourself before you attempt to free the blind. So we have reasons for the state that we're in. Now, the solutions to the problem of the new millennium fall basically into two categories. There's the internal and the external. There's the need to deal with the cleansing and healing of our own emotional bodies. This is number one, the most important thing. Deal with your own issues first. And one of the ways that can be done is to learn right meditation. And when I say right meditation, I'm not advocating any system whatsoever. In fact, that's the problem. Meditation cannot be learned by any system. Real meditation. I mean, it's amazing we've had to wait 2,000 years to even understand this after experiencing all the other isms and ologies and false paths out there. Perhaps we can now grasp this very, very simple point, that real meditation is your meditation, the one you create for yourself. Actually, your whole waking life, if lived correctly, is a form of meditation. Meditation is also not something you do. It is more something that you be, or that you are. Meditation is rooted in the being of life, not in the doing of life. And this is something that's going to take a lot of contemplation, because we are such a doing culture. Our whole conditioning is accomplishment and doing in the physical sense, and even in the mental, intellectual sense, and unfortunately, even in the spiritual sense. We are also doing in a idea of the spiritual world, and perhaps this is erroneous. And the second set of solutions, most people cannot comprehend how some so-called secret society could just move in and take over, as it were. We fail to realize that all post-Diluvian empires are based on the Atlantean pattern, and that the progeny of the warlocks of Atlantis have subjugated all peoples for thousands of years by autocratic and theocratic means. Their own symbols, like the cross and the crown and the double-headed eagle, reveal this very strategy. And we talked earlier about the fact that, yes, we have a dialectic here. We have a ordo ab chao philosophy imposed upon the human race in order to create the dissension. Moreover, the main reason for their success in domination over every class beneath them and in their engineered hierarchy lies in the fact that they have had virtually no opposition whatsoever. Their so-called opposition has been in many instances of their own creation, and the resistance of a few distinguished individuals down through time, however valiant and commendable, has almost no lasting effect. However, humankind's true opposition begins now. So, again, there's no need to be exasperated, as many people who get into researching these kinds of subject matter quickly become exasperated, thinking, well, wait a minute, first of all, could a secret society really come in and take over? Well, as we just pointed out, no, they don't just come in. It's not like the mafia just coming in one day and deciding to, take over. They have built our systems over their original template. But secondly, if you really view history, we understand that even though there have been many valiant attempts, there's been really no campaign of empowered opposition against any of these. And that's because man has been basically a farmer. Man has been kept in an incredible state of bondage, both mentally and physically. And that has lightened up to a certain extent. Yes, libraries are open to us. Yes, we have investigative journalists. Yes, we have cameras, and yes, we have pens. Yes, we have the internet, and so on. And this all constitutes a very important sea change. If we gain the right tools now, we will in fact constitute, in these last days, a true and authentic opposition. So just because it hasn't happened before and things have got into the state that they are now, is no reason to feel apathetic or depressed. The time of true, consistent human opposition has come at this point in time. We talked earlier about how in the next 10 years, all the secrets will be revealed to us. That is absolutely going to happen, and it is part of my work, but it's also part of the coming age of the human race, to understand what has been hidden from them so that they can constitute an important bastion against the authorities that have conspired to destroy us, defensively and on the attack. The two wings that we need to understand. But that can now be done in an educated and proactive and proper way. And again, as part of the solution matrix, what are the tools that we need? Well, I often use the analogy of chess. If I brought a chess master in here and say, hey, I want to learn this incredible game, but you are already a master, could you give me a few pointers? What is it that I need to know that I should never forget as I learn this subject? He will say 4 things. He will say that the first thing that is needed is an incredible sense of patience. In fact, if you really don't have patience, you probably shouldn't even begin the game. Then he will say that another important factor is a sense of timing. This is crucial. It's crucial in any game, even basketball or volleyball or football. The idea of rhythm and timing is also important. In chess specifically, he will say that there's a psychological dimension, which is knowledge of your opponent. And then he will also say that in chess, success is guaranteed if you're willing to make any and all sacrifices that may be needed of you. And then I think after hearing this, wow, could that not be one of the reasons why we're in the predicament that we are today? Because the individuals that have been controlling mankind for 11, 13,000 years, and certainly who helped bring about the Industrial Revolution and the rise of the great cities and the great governments and religions of the world, we understand that these people have an incredible sense of patience. They have agendas lasting decades. John Dee and his Pact with the Macrobes lets us know this, that they could literally wait aeons, hundreds and hundreds of years in order to just facilitate one phase of what they were doing. So there's an incredible sense of patience. And on the other side, we have none at all as human beings. No patience. They have an incredible sense of timing, and I mean that in every sense. As we saw, they already use sidereal timings, astrological timings. They're very conscious of cycles of which we don't even know that they exist. They have policies in government lasting 5, 10, 15, 20 years and more. And we have very little sense of timing. We want everything to be done overnight. Psychological dimension, knowledge of the opponent. They have studied our every move. They know our libido, our sexual drives, our needs, our wants. Every aspect of our biology and psychology has been studied thoroughly by these individuals and by the people that they put in charge of that particular phase to study the creature that they have also created. What do we know about them? So little, which is again one of the problems that we need to face. We know next to nothing about the individuals that we are in conflict with, but they know a great deal about every nuance of our being and behavior. And then perhaps the clincher, willing to make all sacrifices. As we've seen in this program, for them it's just a matter of when and where. Whereas for us, perhaps because we have the moral sensibility, that one's a big stumbling block. So just looking at these 4 simple points can tell us a lot of the reasons of why we are in the predicament that we are today. Now, Ghislaine Langtot, in her book The Medical Mafia, really has something important to say about this whole solution scenario. And I want to look at the points that she brings up. There are also 4. And she uses the metaphor of David and Goliath, the famous old mythological story in the Bible of the young king, coming out against Goliath, this monstrous giant who's controlling and dominating his tribe. And Ghislaine Langtot says that David identified his enemy. That was the first thing. Identify your enemy. Then he found the weakness. He chose a simple weapon. And fourth, he was determined to win. So in programs like this, that's what we're doing is number 1, identifying the enemy. Then we're trying to discover its weakness, which I think is partly, not entirely, to do with the legal powers that we have at our hands. Misused up until now, we're not fully aware of what that means, but I think if we grasp hold of legal empowerment, that is very much a tool that we should have in our armory. And a simple weapon. Again, not to get apathetic and think, oh my goodness, this is outside my control. We know from history that great changes are possible. And the smallest of men, I mean, the Lord of the Rings movie brings that out. The famous statement that even the smallest of people can affect history. Absolutely is true. And of course, the determination to win. No program, no seminar, no lecture can instill that in somebody else. That's something, again, that's autonomous within the self. Buckminster Fuller also has a key point. The great architect and geometrist says, you never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. Einstein said, we never solve a problem with the same intelligence that brought that problem or that error about. Some of the solutions involve collaboration, education, and sovereignty. Collaboration amongst the people who feel of like mind. Education, which is very, very important. Know thine enemy. And the idea of sovereignty, taking the law and strengthening yourself that way, constitutionally and socially. And the education, Eustace Mullins says that no one is more cut off from true education than a student in an American university. So of course, we're not talking about education in the conventional sense. Yes, it would be wonderful if from the earliest days of school we were educated psychologically, we were empowered legally. Yes, we have people with vote clipboards harassing us in the street from morning to night, telling us, here, use your political rights, decade after decade. But nobody's standing there going, hey, we have legal empowerment classes, please come. Or here's a series of TV programs showing you even the most mediocre of your legal rights. No, there's a big void there. So unfortunately, we have to go in and do it ourselves in our own time and energy and educate ourselves. As Jordan Maxwell said about the normal system, the real meaning of graduation is nothing more than gradual indoctrination. William Colby, the late director of the CIA, he says, they are dangerous because there are so many of them. It is one thing to have a few nuts or dissidents. They can be dealt with, justly or otherwise, so that they do not pose a danger to the system. It is quite another situation when you have a true movement, millions of citizens believing something, particularly when the movement is made up of society's average successful citizens. That's right. The fear of the middle class, the fear of the fact that we now can go into libraries and research this fascinating subject of history and its alternative forms. This is a shock. It's a privilege that our forefathers didn't have. But we've gone to schools, we are educated, we can do the research, we can find out all that's been hidden from us. And this statement, and those who've done their homework understand, there's a tremendous fear from those behind the scenes of power. That's why they remain hidden. Often we're condemned for calling them the hidden elite, or that they're the secret government. Well, of course they're secret. They're secret because they have a lot to fear, a lot to lose if we ever should discover about their existence. Now, more specifically, we find that, in fact, there was no declaration of peace signed in America after the Civil War. You see, you have a thing called a declaration of war, but at the end of the war there must be a declaration of peace. There never was one. So we're always in a state of emergency, which gives the President the right to create executive orders, of which there have been many in the other program in this series, Weapons of Mass Deception Behind the New World Order. We look at this concept of the President's rights because legally, again, there has been no declaration of peace been signed. And therefore, technically, we're under a state of emergency in which the state has even more control than it would. Under Roosevelt, America already had signed Chapter 11. So economically, we went belly up back then. This is a fact that's not well known. We find that President Truman passed the National Security Act, which set the stage for the intelligence agencies to assume complete power. And we find that the President has the right to sign executive orders because of the demise of constitutional law in favor of the British Maritime Admiralty law system that rules supreme in the country. So again, legal, legal, legal. Are we under constitutional law? No, we find out that we're under British Admiralty law when you do your homework. And the executive order signing is also part of the whole aristocratic background of the presidents. James Traficante Jr., quoting from the Congressional Record on March 17, 1993, "It is an established fact that the U.S. federal government has been dissolved by the Emergency Banking Act of March 9, 1933, which was declared by President Roosevelt, being bankrupt and insolvent. The U.S. federal government exists in name only." Alan L. Benson, in his book The Dishonest Constitution, lets us know, where other men have skimmed the surface, Professor Beard, this is the man who wrote the book The Economic Interpretation of the Constitution of the United States, Professor Beard has gone through to the core. He stayed months in Washington to get to the core. In his search for ancient papers and documents in the Treasury Department, he went into vaults that were so filled with dust that it was necessary to excavate the papers with a vacuum cleaner. When he came back to the surface, he had damning evidence against a good many of the Patriot Fathers. He knew why they were so anxious not only for a new constitution, but for the particular kind of constitution that was afterward adopted. At the beginning of this program, we talked about that the flowery language, the cover of the language of the Constitution, and we, the people, sounded good, because it's not the easiest thing in the world to bring immigrants over here to push the wheel if they think they're going to have no more rights than they did in the horrible Europe they just left. So you have to create a very alluring situation, almost a utopian imagery to get people seduced to come over here. But there's no actual legal benefits at all. The people are neither free, protected, or secure. And we find that this Constitution that really all just benefits the rich and the powerful had to be covered over in sugar-coated language. James Madison says it in his Eliot Debates, Volume 5, "Where a majority are united by a common sentiment and have an opportunity, the rights of the minor party become insecure. In a Republican government, the majority, if united, have always an opportunity. The only remedy is to enlarge the sphere, that is, unite all the states under a federal government, and thereby divide the community into so great a number of interests and parties that in the first place a majority will not likely at the same moment to have common interests separate from that of the whole, or of the minority, and in the second place, that in the case that they should have such an interest, they may not be so apt to unite in the pursuit of it." There's your basic agenda. Doesn't matter what you say after this point. If coherent action from the people is already snubbed by this divide and rule policy, it really doesn't matter whatever happens after that. You can talk all you want about democracy and freedom, but if there's an injustice that needs to be rectified but nobody can even get around the table, then that's the end of the game. And that is done legally. It is not a political action that makes that happen, it is a legal one. And therefore it is a legal one that can undo it. I referred earlier to the infernal trinity of the problem, confusion, solution. This is one of the secret society mechanisms that has been used to get us into the state that we're now in. Well, man can combat that. We have the power to create our own trinity, the supernal trinity of collaboration and education, and then sovereignty on the other side, which is involving the legal process, which will equal finally our freedom. This is the paradigm that comes out of the ancient world. Have we not got one of the most important central motifs in ancient mythology and the Arthurian kingdoms and traditions of the Gaelic people, the round table? Well, what's implied there? Has anyone ever thought of this? That it's a round table in which no man is the head, that it's the coming together of all that make up kingship? Maybe we need to re-understand what that means and bring it about. A holarchy as opposed to a hierarchy. In the hierarchy, we have an up, we've got a down, we've got a middle. We have the uppers and the downers. And the uppers, those who are above us, this overclass, they are the ones who are conditioned to believe from birth that they are the whole. And they're no longer a part of the totality. And the downers, those are those conditioned to believe and feel that they're merely parts with no connection to the whole. This works beautifully. You're either a part of something or you're apart from it. It can be described as apart and apart. Well, wait a minute. The mass of humanity is going to say, I'm not manipulated, I'm free, right? Well, wrong. It's just a small case of processed lies from a prostituted media, subliminal manipulation and persuasion that's going on daily, the intellectual dumbing down. We got mercury poisoning, we got vaccinations and fluoride, we got antidepressants and hard drugs, we got modified foodstuffs, we got all manner of other suppressants coming out of coffee and sugar. We've got chemtrails in the air and airborne carcinogens. We've got ELF waves on us and implants. We've got manufactured allegiances. We've got artificial class divisions. We have a total lack of historical learning. And we have limited choice, or conversely, over-choice. We have a maritime law system coming out of the ancient world. And we have antiquated and corrupt political systems. And we have a totally corrupt judicial system. How are we free when over 50% of our hard-earned money goes in taxes to a private corporation, the IRS? When we can't even drive on the free ways without a license? When we pay for insurance in order to have the privilege of a driving license? When our children must be sent to government-approved schools or be confiscated from us? Have we ever questioned why that is? Why they could just kick down our doors and take away our children? Or why they even say that suicide is a felony? Hey, maybe it ties into that whole thing that if the country has gone into economic and fiscal default, meaning Chapter 11, all the individuals subsequently from that point are put onto the debt of the United States of America? And is that why it says on a dollar bill to pay all debts, public and private? Is there something we need to know about the indentured slavery of the American people? That they're all bonded onto the stock exchange in lieu of the debt of the United States of America? That they're merely human resources? Is that the reason why at the bottom of a birth certificate it says Department of Commerce? We got questions here about our legal status in the world and how that's being used against us. What happens when the nation's law enforcers are worse than the criminals? When one must buy alternative news information from the so-called underground in order to know what is even going on, because the mainstream media lies to cover their other lies. When schools are now handcuffing kids in as 5 years of age and up, instead of educating them. When America has more political prisoners than any other nation, outsources its key jobs, gives billion in foreign aid, and has almost unlimited legal immigration. Again, note the legality question in all of this. Yes, we're free. As Goethe, right, Wolfgang Goethe wrote, none are more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe they are free. And on a grassroots level, how does this dumbing down process happen? Well, in Haiti and so forth, the voodoo, the concept of the voodoo priest and the zombie, the voodoo priest would use a drug from the flowers of the genus Datura to hypnotize their victims. Victims were given this drug, and thereafter they had to be administered that drug every day, otherwise the zombie effect would wear off. Well, today we got exactly the same thing, only it's called TV. Media. Aldous Huxley says the older dictators fell because they never could supply their subjects with enough bread, enough circuses, enough miracles and mysteries. Under a scientific dictatorship, education will really work. Most men and women will grow up to love their servitude and never dream of revolution. There seems to be no good reason why a thoroughly scientific dictatorship should ever be overthrown. So that's right. As we lose more of our real rights and privileges, don't worry, we'll be given more entertainment. more sex, drugs, and rock and roll, more Dionysian pleasures to totally distract us. Vladimir Lenin, who should know all about it, one of the worst tyrants the world has ever had to endure, says, when a country is selected for attack, we must first set up before the youth of that land a mental barrage which will forever prohibit the possibility of that youth being molded into an armed force to oppose our invading armies. Well, wait a minute, I thought the communists were there to free mankind, free the youth, give us all liberty and freedom for all, right? And Jefferson puts it this way, I really look with commiseration over the great body of my fellow citizens who, reading newspapers, live and die in the belief that they have known something of what has been passing in their times. So legally, there's a great deal that you can do, whether it's impeaching legally those ones who stand to take away our rights. We can handle that legally, perfectly legally. This is the only thing they really fear. They don't fear us if we go into the very circus that they've created for us, this constant tennis game of dialectics back and forth in the political pigsty. Sure, they've created that to slowly disempower us. Nothing gets done, nothing real. You may change the lower levels of the pyramid, but that's about it. But legally, you have perhaps some more clout. And that is shown in the nature of the way that they actually fear anyone who's legally empowered. And we are in the age where there is literature, there is books, there is the internet. There are programs like this one. There is available information out there. If you take the time to research and look into just one of the aspects that we cover in this series of these programs, one can work on just one area here and come to great empowerment and knowledge. Just take hold of the legal issue, for instance, or just take hold of the technological aspect and run with it. Now, as part of the solution era, it is a fact that this present representative democratic model is severely antiquated, dating really from the 1700s. 240 million people represented by a mere 500 members of Congress, most of them Freemasons and secret society members and corrupt to the core. But now with electronic media, say the internet, and direct communication, there is a need for a paradigm shift in this regard. Well, that's right. If we're able to vote by way of websites and computers, could we not then have websites from the detractors so that we can really understand who it is that we're voting for? That might help. Because this ancient way is ludicrous. It used to be that the guy that you least liked in your village, you put on horseback and sent them off to Washington just to get rid of them. That was your representative. We're still using basically that system today. So we have to make use of the modern technology. And a good question to end with is what percentage of the colonists rose up against the legions of King George III during the American War of Independence? Here's the greatest tyrant of the 1700s, the greatest demagogue who had the legions and mercenaries at his beck and call, coming over here and imposing his dictatorship on the American colonies. Well, how many individuals rose up to throw him back into the Atlantic where he belonged? It was as little as 3%. And as much as 6%. So somewhere between 3 and 6% of the population. So wait a minute, what was everybody else doing? Everybody was doing what they're doing now, cowering under the bed, shivering with fear. This detail, the statistic, makes us understand that we don't need to awaken everybody to make change. It's never ever happened like that, and it need not. So don't waste your energy. Power will be in your hands by a proper study and using the right tools. It doesn't require everybody. Everybody is never going to be focusing in one direction, nor will it take that. And then the other aspect we saw brought up by Galan Langtot, be determined to win. Benjamin Franklin says, if you make of yourselves sheep, then the wolves will eat you. So you need determination, you need conviction. Frank Herbert, one of the great writers, the author of Dune, if you think of yourselves as helpless and ineffectual, it is certain that you will create a despotic government to be your master. The wise despot maintains among his subjects a popular sense that they are helpless and ineffectual. Thomas Jefferson, no free man shall ever be debarred the use of arms. The strongest reason for the people to retain the right to keep and bear arms is, at a last resort, to protect themselves against the tyranny in government. Abraham Lincoln, The United States of America can never be destroyed from forces outside its borders. If America falls, it will fall from within, brought down by apathy. When good people do nothing, anarchy reigns. And Martin Luther King, our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. And again, the grassroots approach, as Amy Goodman found out and reported in her book, Exception to the Rulers, she says, people are hungry for unfiltered real-time coverage from real people's perspectives. So hungry that during the Battle of Seattle, there were more hits on the brand new website, indiemedia.org, than there was on CNN.com. So pick up a camera, go out to the streets, interview your friends, find out what's going on, take action, do it on a grassroots level. Don't wait for the 100% or the 70% or everyone else around you to get online and get behind you. Do it yourself. You are a power of one. Kathy O'Brien, a mind control victim and child sex slave, she puts it in the best way possible. They thought that they had left me with no place to run, but they were wrong because I am running right at them. And finally, from the great British, or great English, I should say, romantic poet Percy Shelley, rise up, he says, like lions after slumber, in invanquishable number, shake your chains to earth like dew, which in your sleep had fallen on you. Ye are many, and they are few.
The Maya shamans were remnants of the Lemurian race, whose intelligence allowed them to see into the future and astromantically calibrate when their own nemesis, the Atlanteans, would move towards their endgame. The presence and arrival of both photon belt and galactic center alignment was known to both contingents. Therefore, as I mentioned earlier, it was not a matter of hard prophecy, but of calculated guesswork and even simple common sense, derived from empirical cosmic evidence that prompted the enigmatic prediction concerning 2012 and the coming of the sixth world. If we choose to prepare a dish with certain ingredients, we can be fairly sure in advance what the cooking time and even what the final taste will be. The wild speculations of those idealists within the New Age cabals have merely muddied the waters of clarity and confounded the facts. As I have sought to reveal, history has been a dish prepared with a fixed set of ingredients by some master chefs. It has been formed according to a pre-drawn set of blueprints which both sides were once privy to. The Atlanteans knew that their Lemurian enemies would attempt to make the human race, and Adamic man, aware of what was awaiting them. To this end, they have stuck resolutely to their heinous plan to seek out and obliterate those civilizations created by the descendants of the Lemurians. As history reveals, they have been very successful in their genocidal enterprise. Official historians call their invasions conquests, and though we lament the ruthless manner in which they were carried out, the actual reasons for this kind of zeal have not been fully exposed. We think it was merely an imperialistic quest for land and gold. We think these crimes were committed merely by over-emphatic minions of royal European despots, motivated by some kind of misguided religious fervor. This customized gloss-over serves the history textbooks, read by many millions, but it is not the truth. As the actual histories of Russia, Africa, Ireland, and even America have never been made public, neither has that of the world itself. The actual undoctored history of this planet has been a carefully coveted and guarded secret. In some respects, it might be thought of as the secret of secrets. We are reaching a time in which we will not be able to proceed in our macrocosmic tyranny without cleaning the inner house and graduating psychologically. We are seriously arrested in regards our spiritual development, and we are now going to be asked personally and collectively to sit in after class, so to speak, to catch up. If we are not willing to do this, we are going to find our privileges being removed by the higher powers of justice and balance which are operating around us. When our safety nets are removed, we find that we become very conscious of every step we then take across the long tightrope of life. The time of revealing is no joke, and most human beings are not possessed of inherent skills to deal with the changes that it brings. In short, the photon belt can be seen figuratively as the universal intelligence slowly turning up the light. This has already been occurring, but so gradually that we're not consciously aware of it. We are conscious of the increased darkness caused by the intensification of Akashic light. We are conscious of the psychic and somatic unrest in ourselves and in those around us. We are conscious of the all-pervading moral atrophy and the instability and corruption of political leviathans. We may not see or feel the light, but we do see and feel the spirit of narcissism in evidence all around us. Actually, it is time to be okay with these circumstances, for they're going to continue. They're meant to continue, and there is nothing much to be done about it. The mansion, which was once beauteous and magnificent, but which has long been abused and neglected, and which cannot be restored, must be condemned and leveled. So it is with the world system and status quo. As we progress through the following years, we are not going to be able to be experiencing restoration, but regeneration, not catharsis, but catabolism, not Shakti, but Shiva. We're going to be experiencing Mars and Pluto, not Jupiter and Venus. The survivors are those who can adjust their consciousnesses and mentality to the inviolate movement of nature and synchronize their psyches with the universal meta-theme. We have moved so far from our natural intelligence, moved so far into the labyrinths of ignorance, and have become so comfortable in a world of wall-to-wall lies and fakery that our living, intelligent planet is forced to do something about it. Though we have become accustomed to it, we are somatically, psychically, and socially so polluted that our souls can rarely glimpse the heavens, so to speak. We have so repressed and incarcerated our own true voices and blinded our soul senses that we're doomed to having the fates conspire to augur in cataclysmic external and internal events in order to undermine the rotten edifice we stand worshipping and bring it crashing down around us. As this photonic light gradually intensifies, most people's consciousnesses are going to rebel, as we all do when a bright light is shined in our face. We turn away and cover our eyes. We may even strike out at those holding the light towards us. Those few who can face this light and who are prepared for it will be guided, given their healing, and able to live their dreams. But these few will have to be deeply able to understand what is happening to those around them in order to be defended against the worst effects of this irregular but radical change. As I predict in my book, Atlantis, Alien Visitation and Genetic Manipulation, whether it be by photonic action or major constellational alignments, we are all going to soon know the truth about our actual origins and existence. The masks are coming down, both on the personal and global levels. Our challenge will be to find the strength to accept what happens and to align ourselves with the catabolic forces which enter to restore and rejuvenate our planet and our being. We must reorient the energies that we channel towards rectifying political and social atrophication towards the inner psychological dimension, for it is our own inner house which needs renovation. We are each primarily responsible for what occurs in the space within, from the center of our being to our physical skin. It is this organic temple which needs cleansing, and not so much the outer environment. And, like our ancestors, we are to adjust our consciousnesses so that we are concerned with the overall welfare of the planet and not merely our own material needs. Man has a lot to make up for and great abuses to take responsibility for. His recompense needs to be deep, sincere, and active. The fact is that you are here on this planet as a guest. Your purpose is to leave the planet in a better condition than when you found it. Now, those who do not understand this purpose are condemned to act in a manner which achieves the opposite result. However, no welcome guest destroys this host's property or leaves things in a mess. None of us would tolerate this kind of behavior from anyone in our lives. So please understand that we are not going to be permitted to be delinquent guests much longer by our living host, the Earth. The Maya calendar's date of December 21st, 1999 was the beginning of the time of reckoning. It signaled a time when the living universal presence would begin calling out our names to check out how many of her children are awake and attentive. The sensitive ones who are hearing her have little to worry about. Alternatively, those who refuse to awake and who remain narcissistic, careless, and abusive may have everything to worry about.